In all honesty, a lot more everything. So just bigger game, bigger budget, and more people as well.
We're talking to sound designer Suddi Raval about the differences in between indie and AAA games.
You also forgot to mention that he makes music.
What are some of the games you worked on?
Here is a Lego brick. I've got 21 of them up there. I'm going to spin the camera around there. That little wall there next to R2-D2 is one of these little bricks. And the great thing is, the company were very clever who gave you those bricks. It was part of Warner Brothers where I got those. It was an incredible experience. I was the audio manager for 10 years. And when you completed a game, they thanked you by giving you this award or recognition of the success and the hard work that you put in. And I was really lucky to have worked on, there was more than 21 games because I worked on some non-Lego games as well. There was a few of them. But yeah, I've got a nice little wall of these Lego bricks. So I'll read a few of these off the front of the bricks. So I've got Incredibles, Indiana Jones, Harry Potter, another Harry Potter, Batman, Lord of the Rings, Avengers, Star Wars, Lego Rock Band, Lego Movie 2, The Hobbit. As you can see, there's quite a few titles there. They're kind of the more recent things in my early career, which was the Super Nintendo console. I worked on Spider-Man, Rugrats, even a Mario title called Mario Paint. I keep pulling these things out. I've got a little frame here. That company gave you these. Awesome to actually have a Mario title on my CV. I'm just looking at some of the others. They've got Looney Tunes, Scooby-Doo, Rugrats. I think I might have mentioned that.
Have you worked on any indie games?
Yeah, quite a few. They were generally things I worked on for friends. There was a game called Acquisition. It was a board game for the iPhone. That was an indie game. Beautiful graphics, really beautiful graphics. And it gave me the opportunity to try to make a piece of music that suited the visuals. And a game called Orbit. That was a really cool puzzle game that looked gorgeous. It was very simple. We had to orbit round these objects without getting hit by what sort of felt a bit like asteroids flying around this environment. Made a piece for that, which I really enjoyed making, a kind of an ambient piece. There was a game called Blue Eden. All of these are good friends, people I speak to regularly still who I'd met in the games industry. Blue Eden was an underwater game where you were a fish and you had to survive without getting eaten by sharks. Loads of fun because you had to go through this different phases where you were born in the sea and then you had to feed in order to grow and then you had to avoid the perils and dangers of the sharks. So there's this predator level where I had to make some quite scary music, and it was difficult not to just write the Jaws theme. I admit I did use some low strings because in the law of music it says if you make sounds for any kind of on-screen thing that is meant to be scary, it has to have low strings, so I went with that. That's a joke, by the way, about being the law, in case any kids are thinking I didn't know that was the law.
How do indie games differ from big games?
I'd go as far as to say they're a different universe. There are two different worlds. One of the obvious things is the budgets. There's a lot more money in the bigger games in the development. The term AAA, that's an industry term that people use in order to describe the bigger games in the video game world. So AAA titles will be generally a bigger design. They'll have more levels, more characters, more of everything, more worlds, more voiceover, more sound effects, more music, more of all the things that a smaller game will have. And generally it'll be more complex. A indie game could be effectively a shoot 'em up, or even like some of the things I described where I said something was a board game and another thing was just avoiding something on screen. And that could be the bulk of your work where it's your character moving on the screen. So you give it a movement sound and some music. And there's a term GUI, graphical user interface, which just is the sounds for things like menus. So most games, when you fire them up, they'll give you an option to start the game or even maybe a difficulty level. And as you move the settings up and down where it says hard, medium or easy, you hear a noise, a little blip, or something to signify that you've moved your cursor up and down. All of that requires sound. An indie game may consist of just a few GUI sounds, or GUI, as a lot of people in the industry call it. There'd be a lot less going on in a indie game generally than what you'd find in a AAA title. One of the other big differences is you can usually do a indie game reasonably quickly, so you may even start it from top to bottom in a few weeks, and you have a very short timescale, very quick, very, very small deadline for it. Whereas with the big games, you can spend literally, without any exaggeration, years working on the same game. So to be working on a AAA title for 3 years isn't unusual. And people sometimes say to me, what is that, doing the same thing for 3 years? In all honesty, it's a lot of work because a lot's involved. Part of the video game process is fixing bugs. Bugs is the term that you use for things that go wrong within a game. And especially towards the end, you spend your time just polishing the game and correcting all the bugs and fixing them. And it becomes quite intense. With most video game companies, you go into a period that they call crunch. And that means working slightly extra hours sometimes. And it's completely normal. It's part of the games industry, so, as it is with a lot of industries as you get towards your deadline. And it's in order to just make sure that you get everything in by the time the release date of the game comes. So yeah, a lot more work, a lot more sounds, a lot more music. In all honesty, a lot more everything. So just bigger game, bigger budget, and more people as well.
So there, you have a lot more of everything in AAA.
You get more money?
Should have asked the question. Click here to hear Suddi's recommendations for getting in the games industry.